DAAC 2307, Addicted Family Interventions. Chapter 4, Physiological, Sociological, and Psychological Influences on the Family. During this lecture, your screen will not change, so this is more of an audio lecture as opposed to visual. However, you may access the visual aspect by opening your textbooks to page 89 if you are using the second edition of Alcoholism in the Family by Lawson and Lawson. If you're using a different version, just find chapter 4, and the pages will be off just a little bit, but nonetheless, the information and the format is basically the same. Let us begin by looking at the physiological signs or origins of addiction. Is alcoholism hereditary? Many of you already have your response to this question. Some of you have learned it from other individuals. Some of you may have gathered this by personal experience. But nonetheless, this is a question that frequently arises in the field of addiction. Is alcoholism hereditary? If it is, what factors or what causes alcoholism to be hereditary? What makes a person physically at high risk for alcoholism? Let us have a look. In 1960, Cage conducted a study and identified 174 pairs of male twins. His study required that one of the twins had some type of legal conviction for public intoxication or some other alcohol offense. He interviewed roughly 90% of the sets, so he interviewed about 90% of the 174 pairs of male twins. And his findings were threefold. The first finding was that monozygotic twins, well, let me back up just a little. He identified the sets of twins and separated them into two parts or two groups. One of them were monozygotic twins. Monozygotic twins are those that we frequently call identical twins. Identical twins come from one single egg that splits and becomes two individuals during the birthing process or during the process of birthing. We'll just go with that. Pardon me, nurses in the program. Dizygotic twins are those individuals that were, there were two twins that were fertilized roughly the same time. And so therefore, they are fraternal twins is what we frequently call them. They're two separate individuals that the eggs was fertilized at the same time, and therefore they're growing at the same time in the uterus. So back to his findings. Regarding monozygotic twins, he found that they had a 54% rate where the twin also abused alcohol. Monozygotic twins had a 54% rate where the twin also abused alcohol compared to a 28% of the dizygotic group. Monozygotic twins have 100% genetic likeness, whereas dizygotic twins have about a 50% genetic likeness. So his studies, again, were number one, that monozygotic twins had a 54% rate, as opposed to the second finding that dizygotic twins had a 28% correlation between the other twin using drugs or alcohol. His third finding is he also noticed that the more severe drinking problem in one twin, the higher the concordance rate for use or with use in the other twin as well. So Cage's finding is that inherited traits passed on by families played a contributing role in the drinking behavior. It did not cause necessarily the drinking behavior, but nonetheless, he found that it played a role. There's another study on that page if you just want to glance through that. It's by Partnum, Bruin, and Markkinen. And they took a look at 133 monozygotic pairs and 471 dizygotic pairs of twins. And they also showed a high correlation in the frequency and amount of drinking among the monozygotic twins than the dizygotic. Nonetheless, both studies showed that the traits passed on by alcohol by families played a role in the drinking behavior. Both of those studies did support that alcoholism can possibly or potentially be hereditary. Another study on page 94 was conducted by Clollinger. Clollinger identified two types of alcoholics, type 1 and type 2 alcoholics. Type 1 alcoholics had three characteristics. Number one, first characteristics of type 1 alcoholics are that most common and occurs in both men and women. Type 1 is the most common type of alcoholism that occurs in both men and women, and it consists of either mild or severe alcoholism. And these individuals are characterized by having an inability to control their drinking. So type 1 alcoholics are most common and occurs in both men and women. Type 1 consists of either mild or severe alcoholism. And type 1 also, these individuals have the inability to control their drinking. Type 2 alcoholics have 5 characteristics. Type 2 alcoholics have 5 characteristics. The first characteristic is that they are predominantly men. The second characteristic, that they usually have drinking related problems at a very early age in life. They have some type of drinking related problems at an early age in life. Third characteristics, they tend to be aggressive and engage in antisocial behavior. Third characteristic of type 2 alcoholics is that they tend to be aggressive and engage in antisocial behavior such as fighting, driving under the influence, and so on and so forth. Fourth characteristic of type 2 alcoholics is they rarely abstain from alcohol for any period of time. They rarely abstain from alcohol for any period of time, and they show no guilt or fear of alcohol dependence. And finally, the fifth characteristic of type 2 alcoholics is that the fathers of type 2 alcoholics are likely to be an alcoholic or like to have been an alcoholic and have some type of history of criminality also. So those are your 5 characteristics for type 2 and your 3 characteristics for type 1 alcoholics under Clollinger's study. Clollinger's conclusions and findings were that type 1 alcoholics have what's called a genetic predisposition. Predisposition simply means that it could potentially be predetermined that these individuals are going to be alcoholic. But nonetheless, on the flip side of that, if an individual never takes a drink, then they will not become an alcoholic. But nonetheless, his findings were that type 1 alcoholics have a genetic predisposition. And he also says that their environmental factors account for the severity and the likelihood of them becoming alcoholics. His finding for type 2 is that genetics control a greater level of alcoholism. Alcoholics are under greater genetic control under type 2 or the type 2 individuals. If you will take a look at the bottom of page 95, there are 3 essential questions that you should ask when you're assessing a person's physiological risks of alcoholism. 3 essential questions. Number 1, do you have a parent or grandparent who was or is an alcoholic? Number 2, if you have started drinking, are you or were you able to drink larger amounts of alcohol than most of your friends with fewer physical consequences? And finally, the third question, do you drink large amounts of alcohol? Did you drink large amounts of alcohol from the first time you started drinking? Those are 3 essential questions that will answer a lot or provide a lot of information for you when you're assessing an individual and their alcoholism. Those are the only 3 studies, or more or less 2 studies, Cage's study and Collinger study that we're going to take a look at over the physiological origins of alcoholism, again, which simply address the question, is alcoholism hereditary? All of those studies actually show that genetics play a really high or provides a really high influence on an individual becoming an alcoholic. So let's jump over to page 96 and look at the sociological theories. We've talked about physiological. Now let's take a look at sociological. Sociological looks at the environment. So my question is alcoholism caused by the environment? Can you take an individual whose parents were not or have not ever been alcoholics, or never even drink for that matter, and place them in the social environment and they become alcoholics? That is what that question addresses. A couple of other thoughts I want to plant in your head before we begin is, where do social attitudes come from? Think about where your social attitudes come from. And then the next question is, what are some social factors that can lead to drinking? What are some social factors that can lead to drinking? The top of page 97, social attitudes towards alcohol use result from family orientation. And it's important to note that social attitudes towards alcohol use result from family orientation. I believe I used an example before of, I was once at a restaurant and I witnessed a father and son walk in the door, and they proceeded to sit at the bar. And the dad ordered a beer that was in a bottle and ordered his son a root beer that was in a bottle. And, just sitting at the door, waiting to be seated, I just observed these individuals. Every time dad would sit his drink down, he'd take a drink and sit it down. The son would pick it up in the same manner and sit the drink down. When the dad would switch the bottle from hand to hand, the son would start switching the bottle from hand to hand. So basically, the dad was modeling or placing him in a social environment that could potentially promote the son to begin drinking. Social factors. Social factors are listed on page 97. Several are ethnicity. The next one can be number of alcoholic relatives. Other social factors include age, the age of the individual, the sex of the individual, the religion that person's participating. Socioeconomic class can be an influence or a social factor, and also the family background as well. So let's take a look at Tarter and Snyder. Tarter and Snyder identified 14 variables that affect an individual's decision to either start drinking, to continue drinking, or to stop drinking. We're going to take a look at each of those 14 variables. Again, these variables can affect an individual's decision whether to start drinking or not, to continue drinking or not, or they can influence an individual to stop drinking or not. Number one, and we're still on page 97, childhood exposure to alcohol and drinking models. Again, the example that I just gave a minute ago, that son was definitely exposed to a drinking model, and therefore that will definitely have an influence on whether that son starts drinking, if he does start, if he continues drinking, or it will have an influence on whether he stops drinking or not. But nonetheless, that example for sure will influence him starting. Number two, the quantity of alcohol that is considered appropriate or excessive. If an individual believes that one beer is too much, then chances are they're not going to start drinking. But if an individual says, I think if I don't drink any more than 3 beers, I'm okay. So that mentality already is going to allow that person to start drinking. Now, that will affect them continuing to drink. If they keep it under 3 beers, every time they go out, they drink maybe 1 or 2 beers. Occasionally, that third beer will roll in. They will see themselves as still staying below their baseline, so they're okay. But nonetheless, if that individual starts drinking 5 or 6 beers, and when their limit is 3, they start realizing, whoa, I'm starting to go overboard. I think I may need to stop drinking. So that in itself, the quantity of alcohol that is considered appropriate or excessive will influence an individual on starting, continuing, or stop drinking. Drinking customs will influence an individual as well. If it is custom for a family to not drink at all, that will definitely influence an individual. If it's custom for that family to get wasted on New Year's in front of their children, even allow their children to drink during that time, that custom itself will affect or influence an individual starting, continuing, and stop drinking. Type of alcoholic beverage used. If an individual or family views beer as not really being an issue, but if they move over to the hard liquor realm, that's a whole nother ball game. Many people and individuals carry this. And so the type of alcoholic beverage, as long as I'm drinking beer, I'm okay, whether I'm drinking one or a case a night. Hey, I'm not an alcoholic. But if I take one shot, whoa, that means I'm an alcoholic. So again, that addresses the type of alcoholic beverage used will influence an individual. Levels of inhibition considered safe. Number 5 are the desires that are considered safe. What's considered safe to drink? What's considered not safe to drink? If the DARE programs in schools have taught me that one beer or one drink of alcohol is too much, and I should not drive at all, then that is not considered safe. So chances are that individual's not going to start drinking, or it's going to affect their decision. Or that will also help them to stop drinking if they're at a party and they drink one beer or start drinking a beer and they realize, whoa, I am the designated driver. I'm going to put this down. That will affect them on stop drinking. Number 6, the symbolic meaning of alcohol. What does it mean within that family? What has that individual been taught that it means to drink? Does it mean that it's a bad thing? Does it mean that it's okay? Does it mean that it's acceptable and it's okay to get wasted every once in a while? Or it's okay to drink a 6-pack a night? What is the symbolic meaning of alcoholism? And a lot of these variables will change over time. For instance, symbolic meaning. If a child's, the same scenario we used earlier where the son and dad were at the bar and the son was drinking his root beer and the dad was drinking his beer, as time continues and progresses 3, 4, 5 years down the line, dad begins to drink very heavily, smacks his son around, then that's going to definitely affect that child's decision on starting to drink or stopping to drink. So it could very well change over time. Symbolic meaning, number 6. Let's have a look at number 7, the attitude towards public intoxication. What does it look like, or what does it mean to see an individual in public drunk? That will definitely influence an individual on whether they start, continue, or stop drinking. If an individual does not drink and they go to Bourbon Street in Louisiana and they start witnessing individuals that are drunk, getting arrested, falling, tripping over themselves, throwing up on themselves, that could very well influence someone. Or if an individual was told, hey, you went out, you kind of acted cut up last night at the club, you got kind of wasted and man, you were out there. What do you mean I was out there? Well, remember last week when we went and we were laughing at Bob? That's how you looked. Well, that attitude towards public intoxication could simply influence that individual's decision whether to start, stop, or continue. Number 8 is pretty self-explanatory. The social group associated with drinking. If this is found frequently in high schools, if an individual knows the group that sits over on the left-hand side of the cafeteria are the alcoholics or the partiers that drink and smoke and do drugs, what does that social group look like to them? Is it appealing or is it not? If it's appealing, that will influence them on starting or stopping or continuing. If that's not an appealing group, then it could affect them and cause them to stop or even not start. Again, that was number 8, the social group associated with drinking. Let's have a look at number 9, activities associated with drinking. What activities are associated with drinking? Are individuals engaging in risky activity? or are they not? When the individual starts to drink, what is that social group? What are the activities associated with drinking? Are they risky activities, or are they just non-risky activities? So that in itself will influence an individual. Number 10, the amount of pressure exerted on the individual to drink and continue drinking. The amount of pressure in itself. If an individual feels a lot of pressure from individuals, from others, from friends and peers that they're pretty close with, they feel that pressure. Sometimes that can cause them to start drinking. Sometimes it can cause them to stop drinking. So it just depends on that individual. But nonetheless, the amount of pressure it exerted on them. Number 11, the use of alcohol in social or private context. This addresses the thinking patterns of it's okay for me to drink with my friends, but if I start drinking at home alone, I've got some issues. That's what that addresses. The use of alcohol in social or private context. If I'm drinking by myself, that means I'm an alcoholic. If I'm drinking with friends, and I can even drink more with friends, I'm not an alcoholic. So just that mentality of thinking in itself can influence an individual's decision to start, continue, or stop drinking. Number 12, the individual's mobility and changing different reference groups. Their mobility and changing various reference groups. A lot of times when individuals start drinking or even doing drugs for that matter, they tend to pick a clique of individuals or friends that they exclusively hang around with. They start leaving others alone. If their work environment or their family do not participate in alcohol and drugs, and they're not able to fluctuate between the drinking group and the non-drinking groups, and they start losing friends in the non-drinking group, that could definitely influence that individual's decision to start, continue, or stop drinking. So again, the mobility and changing different reference groups or friends groups. That's why a lot of times you can easily tell in high school or in younger individuals, in their 20s even a lot of adults, they tend to cut loose a lot of their clean friends who are not using or drinking and start only exclusively hanging around those who are drinking or using or engaging in the same patterns of activity. Number 3, the permanence of what's considered staying the same is what that is addressing. If it's okay if I will drink 2 beers a week, but if I start going over that, I've got some issues. So I'm setting my limit at 2, and I'm only going to stick with 2. I'm going to stay the same. If I'm staying the same, I'm okay. Nonetheless, they're forgetting about that level of tolerance that's going to kick in. That's going to cause them to start wanting more. But nevertheless, what is considered staying the same will influence an individual's decision. And finally, number 14, the social rewards or punishments for drinking. If this individual has witnessed for several years now that the group of kids at school that are drinking, they're having a lot more fun. Hey, nobody's gotten arrested. Nobody's had a car accident. They're really having a lot more fun. And Sally over there, who's usually pretty quiet, wow, she's a light of the show of the party whenever she starts drinking. Hey, that's pretty cool. Wow, that's a reward. I want to fit in. I want to hang out with them. I think I'll start drinking too. Or what are the punishments for drinking? DWIs. Man, my friend at school has received 3 DWIs, and he's a senior in high school. Man, he's already got a felony. I don't want any parts of that, so I think I think I'll pass on drinking, or I think I'll stop drinking now. The social rewards or punishments for drinking will definitely influence an individual also. These are Tarter and Snyder's 14 variables that affect an individual's decisions, whether to start, to stop, or even to continue drinking. Continuing on page 97 at the bottom, Callahan also conducted a study looking at the sociological influences on an individual to start drinking. Callahan concluded that the social environment to a large extent determines whether an individual will or will not drink. He also said social and psychological variables also determine the level of drinking maintained. So he identified 6 variables that determine a person's drinking level. 6 variables that determines a person's drinking level. First variable, an attitude favorable to drinking. If an individual is placed in an environment, whether it's a family or community or a group of friends, that the attitude is favorable to drink, then what Callahan is saying in just a period of time, that eventually that individual is going to develop an attitude that's favorable to drinking. Here's a prime example. Think about when you were younger. For some of you guys, it may take a while to get back. Remember when you were probably in elementary school, kindergarten or first grade, and you were going through the DARE program, and you remember the officers or the teachers or the spokesman just pounding in your head not to smoke. Smoking's bad for you. Smoking's going to kill you. You can receive cancer from smoke. Secondhand smoke's horrible. And you getting in your car that day or sitting on the bus, riding the bus home. For some of you guys back in time, riding the horse and carriage home, stopping at a red light and looking out your window, seeing this lady sitting in the car next to you, puffing on a cigarette. And what was your response? It was probably, ew, nasty. And the very next day, after school, you hop in the car, you end up getting stopped by the same red light, and you look out that window, and there's that lady puffing again. And it literally almost turns your stomach. Time continues on, and your parents are smokers now. You stop at the red light. A couple of years later, you look out the window. Man, that lady's still smoking. Mom, Dad, y'all need to quit smoking. Time continues on. Another year or two passes. You look out the window. You get approaching junior high age now, and you look out the window and you see that lady smoking. Yeah, doesn't bother you as much. Time continues on. You're in junior high now, and you look out the window. You see that lady smoking, and you blow your puff of smoke back at her. An attitude favorable to drinking or an attitude favorable to smoking, because that child has been placed in that environment. They've been conditioned over time slowly to become used to something that can definitely influence that individual or determine their level. So back to drinking. Number 2, Callahan's number 2 variable, the amount and type of environmental support for heavy drinking. If there's support in the community for heavy drinkers, then that can definitely influence a person's drinking level. If there's not any support in the community, that can influence. And that can mean a community agency or you as a counselor, but that can also mean the environment that person's living in. If there's no support in the family, that can definitely influence an individual. Sometimes it influences them the wrong way and it causes them to become closet drinkers. But for the most part, that will definitely influence them not to drink or to stop drinking. The third variable that will influence a person's drinking level or determine a person's drinking level is at the top of 98. The individual's impulsiveness and his or her desire for conformity or nonconformity. The individual's impulsiveness and his or her desire for conformity or nonconformity. Are they impulsive individuals or are they not? Are they acting off impulses that they want to just drink and don't care what anyone else says? Or are they really giving it some thought? And then if they know the rules at home, am I going to conform to these rules and respect my wife and not drink? Or am I going to non-conform and just sneak off and drink or either drink in front of them at home? Fourth variable, the degree of the individual's alienation and maladjustment. The degree of the individual's alienation or separation and maladjustment to society. So if I do drink, is this going to separate me and alienate me from society? Well, being a college professor, I don't want that to happen. So I I don't want society to look down on me. I don't want my students to look down on me. So yeah, that'll influence my drinking. Um, so yes, that number 4 for sure. Number 5, the individual's expectations for success. Is it considered successful if I drink? Does that affect my successful level at work or not? Does that affect my success at home with my family or not? So the individual's expectations for success. And then finally, the 6th is the looseness of social control. If society is real, if we'll just take this from a law enforcement perspective. If an individual knows, if I take this drink and I will have to drive back home, and I know that the law enforcement are really heavy on drinking and driving, they're going to be watching, they're going to be stopping, that can definitely influence an individual and how much they drink. Now, if social control is really loose, law enforcement just kind of brushes it off. They're dealing with other issues. An individual never sees them in their community. So they choose to drink and drive. That can definitely have an influence on how much an individual drinks. Sociological factors. So we looked at 2 individuals there. We looked at Tarter and Snyder and their 14 variables, and we looked at Callahan's 6 variables. Let's switch gears. So my question is alcoholism caused by the mental or is it caused by psychological issues? So we're going to talk about the psychological influences of alcoholism on an individual. Page 103. For those of you flipping through your books, page 103. We've talked about the sociological and how the social environment can affect an individual. We've talked about the physiological and how hereditary can potentially affect an individual or influence an individual to become an alcoholic. Now let's take a look at the psychological arena. The psychological arena is considered the most important arena when addressing alcoholism. And we say that as counselors because you can take an individual whose parents are alcoholics, but if their psyche is against it, and not because of sociological influences, but because of the information that they've studied and that they've learned, psychologically they're strong and they're totally against alcoholism or drinking or even doing drugs, then they've got it made. If an individual grows up in a society or an environment where alcoholism is relatively heavy, whether that's by friends or by family members, but that individual has made up their mind that they're not going to do it, then that's very powerful also. So therefore, we take it from that perspective as counselors and address psychological arena has been very important. If you empower that individual and you strengthen that individual and you teach that individual coping skills, then they can probably and potentially make their own decisions. Some say that the personality of the individual, that it is a personality of the individual that has more to do with the way he or she deals with their environment than any other factor. Kind of scanning down to the next paragraph on page 103. There's not seem to be any specific personality type or an addictive personality or of the addictive personality. There seems to be no specific personality typology. And we'll take a look at some of those in assessment skills. Personality temperaments, they're basically 4 main personality temperaments, and all of them fall under addictive personality. So, however, there are certain characteristics that can help to understand addictive behavior. And some of those characteristics are dependency, denial, depression, superficial sociability. Those are the shallow socializers. Emotional instability, suspiciousness, those who tend to be suspicious of others. Low tolerance for frustration. Impulsivity without forethought, impulsiveness. Self-devaluation, again, reducing themselves or low self-esteem. And chronic anxiety or long-lasting anxiety. Those are all characteristics of alcoholics. Alcoholics. Let's take a look at Glenn's study, or on page 104. Glenn provided characteristics for high-risk people of alcoholism. In 1981, Glenn provided us with characteristics of high-risk people of alcoholism. Number one, low identification with viable role models. That is a characteristic of an individual with alcoholism. These individuals really have no role models or individuals that they look up to. In this arena, a person sees themselves as different from everyone else. Their values, they consider their values different. Their attitudes are usually different, and they consider their behavior as being different also. The book gives an example. A child might not relate to his or her family. It may reject their values. These a lot of times are the kids we tend to refer to as anarchists, not to be confused with the Gothics, because anarchists tend to dress a lot in black as well. But they just disrespect authority, disrespect others' values and attitudes because they feel like theirs are just totally different and they just don't fit in. Second characteristic identified by Glenn for high-risk people of alcoholism is low identification with the responsibility for family process. That means they're simply low or no loyalty to anything. They don't identify strongly with things greater than themselves. They don't identify with other people, with groups, with humankind in general, or just with God. They feel like they're totally different. They just can't identify. Low identification with and no responsibility to anyone, anything else. Third characteristic, high faith in miracle solutions to problems. They have a high faith in miracle solutions to problems. This area involves the skills and attitudes necessary to work through problems. That includes a belief that problems can be solved through application of personal resources. These skills are poorly developed. People believe that problems have been escaped when they cannot feel those problems anymore. These people believe that things just happen. Things just happen. There's no solution to it. They have the lack of skills to work through their problems because it just happened. These individuals do not believe that there is in any way, there's no way to affect the future or the present. Things just happen. Fourth characteristic for high-risk people of alcoholism identified by Glenn is inadequate intrapersonal skills. Inadequate intrapersonal skills. These are skills from within. These deals with the skills of self-discipline, self-control, and self-assessment. They are inadequate with these skills. A weakness in these areas show up as the inability to cope with personal stresses and tensions, dishonesty with self, denial of self, and the inability to defer gratification. Again, lack of self-control, lack of self-discipline, lack of self-assessment. A lot of times these individuals are very impulsive. Fifth characteristic, inadequate interpersonal skills. Interpersonal skills involves skills for between individuals, relationships between individuals. These are the communication skills. These individuals lack the cooperation, lack negotiation. They lack empathy or feeling, the ability to feel what other people feel. They lack listening skills, and they lack sharing skills as well. Number six, inadequate systemic skills. Inadequate systemic skills. This is the inability, or these individuals are unable to effectively problem solve. Unable to effectively problem solve. So to get their needs met, irresponsibility arises. A refusal to accept consequences for behavior and scapegoating are all expressed when there's a weakness in this area. Irresponsibility, well, they come up with all types of excuses. They just simply don't take responsibility for their lack of actions. They refuse to accept the consequences of their behaviors. And scapegoating, well, it wasn't my fault, it's because of Johnny over there. And finally, the seventh characteristic of high-risk people of alcoholism, the seventh characteristic, inadequate judgment skills. Inadequate judgment skills. This area includes the ability to let me start over. This area includes the ability to recognize, understand, and apply appropriate meanings to relationships. They're not able to judge. They have some type of repetitive, self-destructive behavior. An example of this is sometimes there are individuals. I have an uncle that's been married 6 times, and in every marriage, when they break up, it's always the other individuals that are having the problems. It's never him. He's never caused any of the issues. He's always walking the line straight and fine, but it's always those individuals. They're always the ones with the problems. That's a self-destructive behavior. Does not have the ability to recognize or understand the appropriate meanings of a relationship. This concludes our study over the physiological, sociological, and psychological influences on the family. It is safe to say, summarize as many as you have a problem already concluded, that these factors can and may influence or affect an individual's decision to start, to continue, or to stop using alcohol, whether that's the physiological, sociological, psychological arenas. It also is safe to say or address that each of these aspects of the individual, you must address every individual when you're talking to them. Address the physiological. Is there a history in their family of individuals drinking, whether that's siblings, parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts? It's your duty and your job to paint as clear a picture as you can over the physiological. And sociological, address the social environments that they're living in currently, that they grew up in, or that they were exposed to potentially during their process of growing up. And you also address the aspect of psychological as well. All of these must be addressed. They all must be addressed in order for counseling to be successful for that individual. Don't just choose one of these. Look at each of them.